Alright, so welcome back to another one of my video demonstrations. Now for this particular demonstration, I want to look at how we can send emails using PHP, which is something that I would have covered. But this time around, I want to look at how we can send emails with an attachment using PHP. So what we'll do first is that we'll create a form similar to this one, where you can go ahead and attach a file, and once you click the submit button, it will send that file as an attachment along with any other information you want to specify. All right, now let us get right into it and first create this form, and then I'll write the PHP code just to show you how you can actually send your attachments using PHP. Now, there are some parts of this that I might speed up in terms of the parts that you should know already. Creating forms, expecting that you know that already, and some of the general PHP coding as well. I won't spend too much time on it, but the specific parts that speak directly to sending the email, I will definitely spend a little more time going over those. All right, so let us get started first with creating the form. All right, so I am using Visual Studio Code. I have a file created here already that I'm calling attach.php. All right, so first things first, I'm going to go ahead and write my HTML basically. So let me just use the boilerplate to spin up a little HTML here for me. Alright, so for my title, I'm going to say send attachment with email. Alright. Alright, and then next I'm going to just create a form. So I'm going to use my form tag here. And we need the following input fields. So one for your name, one for the email address, the subject, the message, an input field to attach the file, and our submit button. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and say input. For this one, I'm going to set the type to text, and I'm also going to set a name attribute, and here I'm going to say sender name. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and just create the other input fields. Alright, something I want to do as well, I want to use some bootstrap just to format my page. Give my page a little nice look, color the button and so on and so forth without writing my own CSS. So I'm going to use a bit of bootstrap. So let me add my bootstrap link first, and then I'll go ahead and create the other input fields. Alright, so I went to the official bootstrap page and I grab the following. Alright, so now we can color our buttons and just color the text and so on and so forth as well. Alright, so as I said, now I'm going to add the other input fields for our form. And while I'm doing that, I'm just going to add the bootstrap style or the bootstrap classes that I want to use as well. Alright, so this is my form. I went ahead and placed the form in a div as well. And I place all my input fields inside of a div as well. Now, importantly, we need to remember what we set for the name attribute for each of our input fields, because we need these when we are writing the PHP. Right, so when we're writing the PHP code, we need the values from the name attribute. So for the name of the sender, we are using sender name. For the email, I'm saying sender email. For the subject, I'm using subject as the name value. And for the message, I'm using message. For the file, this is where we will, this input field right here is for attaching the file. So for that, I'm using attachment as the name, and this is our button. All right, so let me just close this one and run this again. Also, this is not necessarily that important, but I'm using my PHP server within VS Code. So I installed an extension for the PHP server. So that's what I'm using to actually run my project. All right, so I'm just going to run that now. And this is what my form is currently looking like. So I need to add some styling to this just to get it to look the way I want it to look. All right, so for the div that is surrounding the form, as I said, I'm going to add a little bit of styling to it so we can center the form and also have the fields not stretched across the entire browser or the entire page. All right, so I have added this inline CSS just to ensure that the form is formatted the way that we wanted it to look. I could use Bootstrap here, but it was much easier for me to just add some inline CSS instead of adding the Bootstrap for now. So our form is now looking like this. Next, I'm just going to add a little title or a heading on our page, and then I'll get into the PHP aspect of things. All right, so I went ahead and added this heading to my form or to my web page. Here I'm using the Bootstrap H1 class, and I'm centering that as well using Bootstrap, and I'm also changing the text color to green using Bootstrap. Right, so now our form, well, our page should be looking like this, which is definitely what we want. Now to move on to the PHP portion of things. All right, so for the PHP, I will write that above my HTML. So let me just push this down a bit. All right, so let me go ahead and say PHP. And let me go ahead and just close my PHP block. All right, so first thing first, I am going to use the isSet function. So PHP can listen for whenever, or PHP can recognize whenever the submit button is clicked, and also it can recognize whenever a file is attached. So we want to set two things. We want to set, or want to check to see if a value is set for the button click, and also if a value is set for the file attachment. Now, just quickly again, in the form that we have, for the button, we set the name equal send, and for the file, attachment input field, we set the name equal to attachment. So I'm going to be using attachment and send in our isSet function. All right, so I'm going to say if and then say isSet. All right, so we are now waiting, or we'll be checking to see if the button is clicked. And I'm going to be using the post super global for this because I'll be using the post method. All right, so what I'll pass here is send, which I'm going to type send here, which is the name of the button, or the name that we gave to the button. All right, and then next I'll do something similar for the attachment input field, where I'll do an isSet for it as well using the post super global, and I'll pass attachment as the value within the post super global. Well, actually, for the attachment, I'll use the files super global. So there is a super global in PHP known as files, and that is used when we're handling any file upload from a form in PHP. All right, so this is what our first portion of the PHP code will look like. So we have the isSet just to check for the button being clicked, and we have the another isSet just to check to see if a file is actually attached. Right? All right, let's go ahead and put some code in the body of this if statement. All right, so the first thing I'll do is I will specify a from email and the recipient email. So who's the email coming from and who should receive the email. Now for my from email, I'm going to be using the email address that I would have set up on localhost as my email sender. Right, I have a previous video where I did a walkthrough in terms of how you can use Gmail as your SMTP server to send email from localhost. Right, I have another video as well where I spoke on how you can use a third-party platform like Sendinblue. Well, it was Sendinblue at the time. They would have now changed their name to Prevo. So I'm going to use my Gmail address here that I'm using as my username for my SMTP server, and here I'm going to put the email address that I want the attachment to go to, or I want the email with the attachment to go to. All right, now that is done, let me go ahead now and create some other variables based on our form here. All right, so I'm going to create a variable for the sender's name and the subject message and so forth. All right, so here I would have created a variable for the sender's name. Again, this is coming from the form, and this is the name that we would have, or this is the value that we would have given to the name attribute for this input field. All right, and the others follow the same principle, where this particular variable is for the sender's email, this is for the subject, and this one is for the message. Alright, next I'll be using my files superglobal to get certain information on the file that we'll be uploading. So for example, if we need the file type, if we need the file name, if we need the file size, then the files superglobal variable will assist us in doing that. All right. Again, if you are working with PHP, if you are using PHP, you should be familiar with what superglobals are, right? Not to stray from the video that I am looking at, or the lesson that I'm looking at. But just to mention that super globals would include things like your posts, your files. We have a request super global and so on. So if you're not familiar with those, which will be surprising seeing that you are doing PHP, but if you're not familiar with those, then I would suggest you do a little bit of reading on it. Maybe in another demo or another lesson, I'll go over the super globals in PHP. So you can let me know if that is something that you want me to cover. All right. All right. Now here I created variables as well just to store specific um, information that we can get from our file or the file that is being attached. Now for the files super global, right? It is operating like a multidimensional array. Here I won't get into that too much right now, where it is taking two values, right? So the first one is the attachment, and again, this attachment is the name that we gave to our field right here, or file attachment field right here. We call it attachment. So we can get a temporary name, right, for the file. We can get the specific name, we can get the file size, the file type, and any error associated with us trying to attach or upload our file. Now, these things here, the temp name, the size, type, and error, those are standard. Those are used well, it doesn't depend, regardless of the application that you are working with. Once you're working with files and the files super global, these things right here come along for the ride. The temp name, size, type, and error. All right, next I'm going to create an if statement just to check if there's any issues or if there were any errors when we were trying to attach the file or when we were trying to upload the file, right? All right, so our if statement will check to see if the number of errors being returned if they are greater than 0. So from this part of our PHP code, this would record any error that would have occurred. So if the number of errors occurred are greater than 0, then this message should be displayed saying error upload or upload error, sorry, or no files uploaded, right? All right, now the next thing we want to do is to actually see if there's anything written in the file that we would have uploaded. So I'm going to use the file manipulation functions in PHP to first open the file for reading purposes and then actually try to read the contents of the file. Now, what that does is ensure that we don't send a blank file to someone as an email attachment, right? All right, so here I have my file handle, which I'm just calling handle. I am using the fopen function here to open a file, and then the letter R is specifying why are we opening the file. So the purpose of opening the file is to read from it. And then the fread function is being used to actually read the contents of the file to see if there's anything actually in the file. And once you are finished working with your file in terms of opening it and reading from it, then you should always close your file. Similar to if you're working with a database, you want to close your database once you are done with connecting to the database, whether to send or retrieve data. Right, so that's good practice. Now, for persons who are not familiar with the file manipulation functions in PHP, that is something I am willing to go over as well. So you can always comment and let me know if you want me to cover that. Okay, so now when we're sending an email with an attachment, there are certain things that we need to specify. All right. Whenever you are uploading a file, as a matter of fact, there are certain things that we need to specify. So we need to specify a boundary. No, because our email will be a multi-part email, meaning there'll be text coming from our message field and so on. And then the next part will be an actual attachment. We need to set specific boundaries where one content starts and where the other content ends. So where the file attachment and the actual plain text, where it starts and where it ends. So we need to set boundaries. I must mention as well that for the purpose of sending our email with an attachment, we will be making use of the MIME protocol. Right, so that is something that you probably will need to read up on as well to get a full appreciation. Some persons are familiar with it already or might be familiar with it already. So you can, just do a quick search, look up the MIME protocol. Again, that is very useful when we are sending emails with attachment. And MIME here stands for Multipurpose Internet Mail Extensions. So MIME, Multipurpose Internet Mail Extensions. All right, so a part of the MIME protocol specify that we need to do a bit of encoding, and for that purpose I am using the base64 encode function here. And again, PHP, as you should know, seeing that you're working with PHP has a lot of functions that makes writing PHP applications very easy or very straightforward, right? And then here I have my boundary variable, and I'm just using the MD5 function here just to generate like a random string that we'll be using as the boundary parameters. So it will state where the boundary starts and where the boundary ends. We could do something else here. Instead of typing the word random, you could type any word that you want to type there. You can even do something like using the time function, so it will generate a random string as well. So that could work as well, right? Now let me just go back to my original, which is using the random. All right, so we open the file, read through the file. We are now encoding the content, which is what we're doing here. And we would have set our boundary value that we are using. Again, that is part of the MIME protocol, but also that is a boundary needs to be set whenever we are uploading files to send, whether via email or once we're using like an HTTP request to send a file, then we need to set the boundary values. Just to mention as well that the chunk split here is very useful in terms of it will take whatever is encoded and basically split it into a length of 76 characters, right? Right, now when sending an email, there are, well, when sending an email in PHP and when sending an email in general, there are certain parameters that we must have. So we must specify who the recipient is, so who the email is going to. We must specify a message. We must specify a subject. Well, those are things that are required, right? Sometimes if you try to send an email and you don't put the subject, you might get a little warning saying that no subject, or it might send with the no subject as the default subject. If there is nothing typed in the body though as a message, then you'll get that as well, saying that you're sending an empty email or an email without a message or a body. No, you can also specify header variables or header values, I should say, right? So you can specify header values as well. So that could be a from address, um, to a from address, a CC address, or a BCC address, or you can even specify a reply to address. So for us, and seeing that we want to attach a file, um, I'm going to specify certain values and store that in a variable called headers. So I'm going to create my variable here. I'm going to call it headers. All right, so let me. All right, now I'm going to set some values to this headers variable. All right, so the first value I'm setting here is stating the MIME version that I'm using. And as far as I know, MIME version 1.0 is really the only version that we have in existence. But you can always do a Google search on that as well and see what you come up with. And feel free to let me know in the comments, and otherwise, um, you know, if that is the only version that we have. But based on my knowledge, that's the only version that we really use, version 1.0. Now, I want to add additional um, values to our headers variable. So what I'll do is I will concatenate those values into our headers variable, and I'll show you what I mean by that shortly. All right, so here, apart from adding the MIME version, I'm also adding a from address. I'm also adding a reply to address. So when the recipient gets the email and they click to reply, the reply that will load whatever email is being stored in this variable right here. Another value being added to the headers is the content type, and we're setting that as multi-part mixed. Now that is important because, as I said, we'll have one part being the attachment and then the next part being the plain text that will be sent in the email, and we need to specify the boundary as well. So where does the attachment part starts, where does the attachment part ends, where does the plain text part start, and where does the plain text part ends. All right, now you should notice that I'm using my dot operator here to both concatenate and assign values to the same variable as we go along. All right, so now that we have set up the headers for our email, I am going to do something similar and set up the body of the email. So remember, our email will be in two parts. There will be the plain text, and then we will have the attachment part as well. So I'm going to create a variable for the body. All right, so this is for the plain text portion of our email. So I need to set the boundary. All right, so that is done. Again, concatenating with the dot operator while assigning. All right, so here we're setting the content type, and that is set to plain text. I am setting the content transfer encoding, and we are using the base 64 for the encoding, which is why we use it here, right? And it's being used here as well. Now, the next thing I'm going to do now is store the attachment portion of our email into the body variable as well. All right, so this is the attachment portion of the email body or the message. I guess you can say that. So again, we need to establish the boundary where the attachment portion starts. We need to set the content type. Here, the content type is being set to type, which we are getting from our file attachment. All right, so the type is coming from here. And we're going to be using things like the size and the name and so on as well as we attempt to send our email. All right, so we set the name equal to name. Now, this part here is important. The content disposition attachment, that is basically saying to us that we are sending an email with an attachment, and the attachment should be made downloadable. So when you get the email, you can download that attachment, and we are establishing what the file name is, which is coming from name. Again, that is coming from here, right here. Now the X attachment ID, again a part of the MIME protocol. The X attachment ID here is just saying that this will be a unique string for this particular attachment. Now we want to make it as unique as possible, so I'm using the rand function here just to randomly generate a string for our attachment ID. And we are specifying the encoding, or we're attaching the encoded file to the email. Right, so we would have stored the encoding or the encoded file in this variable right here that we're calling encode content, and that we can find here. Right. So let me just break this down. Here we read the file and stored it in a variable called content, and then we went ahead and encode that content and stored it in a variable called encoded content. Now that encoded the file that we want to attach, right? And it's right here. So that is there as part of the message body as well, or the email message body. All right. Now I'm going to use the mail function from PHP to send our email. You should be familiar with the mail function, especially if you're at the point where you want to send emails in PHP. So the mail function takes three mandatory things: the recipient email, the subject, and the body. And we can also add additional information, headers information, or headers data, and we are getting those from here. So in the headers variable, we are storing the fact that we are using the MIME version. We are storing the reply to email. We are also storing the fact that the email is of multi-part mixed, and we are establishing that a boundary was created as well for our multi-part email. What I want to do is I want to store this function in a variable so we can actually use it in an if statement to see if the email was sent. So this function, this mail function, typically will return true or false. So if you notice here, it's a Boolean function. So true, the email was sent; false, the email was not sent. So I want to store this in a variable so I can now use that variable within an if statement. All right, so I'm calling the email send mail result, and here I'm going to just say if send, and what I'm going to store in this. All right, so here I have my send mail result, which is what I'm storing my main function in, that variable, right? And what I want to do now is to go ahead and use that, or use this in an if statement. Now, if successfully, if the message was sent successfully, right? So if the message was sent successfully, I want to display a message, a success message. So I'm going to make my success message a little bit unique. So I'm going to create a variable, and what I'm going to store in this is actually an alert. Now I'm using sweet alert to display my message. Right, so for that I need to go ahead and include the link to sweet alert in my form, in my HTML right here. Right. Now sweet alert is JavaScript, but it gives you, graphically appealing alert messages. All right, so this is the sweet alert website. So you can go here and follow the necessary instructions, how to install sweet alert. Right, if you want to use npm and install it, or if you just want to grab the CDN and so forth. I actually went ahead and installed sweet alert in my project. So you can do that, or you can just grab the CDN, whichever one you prefer. All right, so this is linked to sweet alert that I'm using. And what I'll do as well, so this is the CSS link for sweet alert, and just before the closing of the body tag, I'm going to add the JavaScript link for sweet alert as well. All right, so this is the JavaScript for that, and this right here, I'm just making reference to the jQuery library as well, because I need that also. And I found that for me it didn't work without the jQuery library, so I added that as well. All right, now back to my PHP. So here I'm creating, right, so here I'm creating a message to be displayed once the email was sent successfully. All right, now my message will be a bit unique, where it will be an alert that will pop up. All right, so this is how I went ahead and formatted my message. So I basically took this from the Sweet Alert website. They have a lot of examples, if I can find them. All right, so they have a lot of examples, right? But what I did is I custom it a little bit just for my purpose. All right, so once the email is sent, and if it is sent successfully, then it will pop up this alert for me. If it wasn't sent successfully, then this message will be shown. All right, and I think that is basically it for the PHP. Now, something that is very important here is on our form. On the form, I need to specify a few things. I need to specify the method that I'm using, which will be using post method, and I'm also going to specify the encoding type that we're using on the form to upload and submit the file. Alright, so the encoding type, which is specified by the enc attribute here, or the enc type attribute. Alright, so this basically stands for encoding type, and it will be multi-part form data. because one part attachment, other part plain text. The method is set as post, nothing for the action, and I just add a little bit more um, style right here to the overall form. Right now, what I want to do as well, because I want the message to be displayed within the HTML aspect of things. In the HTML, I added another PHP block, and all I'm doing is echoing the success variable. So again, remember what is being stored in the success variable is everything here, right? That is being stored in the success variable. Importantly as well, I went ahead and initialized that variable here, right at the top. And that is basically it. So we can now test out our application just to see if it actually works. All right, so I'm on the application now. So I'm going to type in a few things. So Storm, that's your email address. Let's say business plan, and let's say um, C. All right, so let's just say C business plan. Now I'm going to choose a file to attach. So let me see if I can find my business plan, which is right here. And this could be any file, could be a PDF file, could be a Word document, whichever file, right? Let us now submit this and see if it will actually submit. And here it says success, your file has been submitted. So I'm going to check the email address that I would have sent the file to, well, that I would have sent the email to, and see if I actually got the email. All right, so I went in and we actually got the email. All right, so let me open this up. It says C business plan, that's the plain text part of it, and then this is the attachment part of it. Now if I click on reply, the reply will be sent to this email address that was specified here. All right, and that is because when we were setting up the reply, to, we actually used the email address that was collected from the form. So that is it in a nutshell in terms of how you can attach a document and send that document as email. So the attachment could be anything. It could be a text file, a PDF file, a Word document. It could be audio, it could be video, as long as it's not too large, and we could send that. Right, so hopefully this video is somewhat helpful. If there's any of the concepts that I went over that is not as clear to you and you'd want me to provide some clarification, then probably you can reach out to me. But again, hopefully this would have been somewhat helpful to you. All right, enjoy the rest of your day.